Please allow me to present a situation to you. You're feeling under the weather with the beginnings of the common cold. You've got a headache, you've got a runny nose, upper respiratory congestion, body aches and fever are starting to set in, and you're just feeling really miserable. So to fight this cold, you go to your local pharmacy to get over-the-counter cold medicine to treat it. While you're not feeling the best in the world, you get grilled by the pharmacist about what your symptoms are as if you're lying, and you got to show identification to buy the cold medicine, which is an over-the-counter drug, as if you were buying tobacco or alcohol. You may wonder why you were put through this indignity while you're feeling irritable and only wanting some relief to your cold symptoms. Well, the answer is restrictions on cold medicine are necessary to cut down on the making of methamphetamine through a home synthesis process called bathtub meth, a very dangerous trend over the last couple of decades. I've been a police officer since 1997. During the course of my career, major focus has been on drug interdiction. During the first part of my career, I mainly saw crack cocaine out on the streets. There was more of it than there was of the other drugs combined. Then the trend switched to homemade methamphetamine about in the early 2000s. This homemade meth was made by people clandestinely with whatever ingredients and whatever containers and so on and so forth that they could find, hence the term bathtub meth, because sometimes it was cooked in bathtubs, and also being made by people who weren't the most intelligent in the world, so it was a recipe for a lot of issues that occurred. The main reason this type of drug became prevalent around that time was due to the ability for the drug user to make it themselves. They didn't have to go out and meet with a drug dealer who could have been an undercover cop, which would cause them to get arrested and face legal consequences, or they wouldn't have to deal with a drug dealer that may decide to rip them off and sell them fake drugs or rob them of their money without providing them any product. They could buy the stuff for making the homemade methamphetamine at just about any grocery store. And also during the first few years of this epidemic, the general public wasn't educated on the ingredients used for homemade meth, so they didn't have to worry about a grocery store clerk calling the police for them buying items such as aluminum foil, hydrogen peroxide, and cold medicine. A lot of the chemicals used in homemade meth can be explosive under the right or the wrong conditions. The first process of making meth, they have to get a component out of the cold medicine, and they do this by soaking it in a solvent, which is usually camp stove fuel. Camp stove fuel by nature is flammable, and in the process of making meth, there is heat that's generated as a byproduct. So you have a recipe of a flammable liquid in the camp stove fuel, the heat generated later on in the process, and the results are usually disastrous with explosions and things like that. I talked to a meth cook one time that had a big chunk gone out of the back of his calf. About a fist-sized section of it was nothing but gnarled up scar tissue. He told me that he was making meth one time and his container fell off the workbench and exploded as he turned around to work on something else and took out the chunk from his calf muscle there. Imagine if that had been a child that had wandered up on that container sitting up on a table and pulled it off on top of their face with the horrific effects, or could have even killed a child. Some of the ingredients that are used in homemade meth produce toxic fumes. These toxic fumes can get out from the containers where they're needing to use them in the meth making process and permeate other areas of the home they're in, or if they're in an apartment complex, even adjacent apartments. Then you could have an innocent bystander who has no knowledge of what's going on exposed to this chemical gas that is released and have ill effects through no fault of their own. The lingering chemicals from a homemade meth cook can stick around in a property for years, even after the process is done and the bad guy's been arrested or moved on elsewhere, and can affect the property's values. In the TV series Breaking Bad, which is about a high school chemistry teacher who turns to cooking meth to support his family, one of the characters is another meth cook named Jesse Pinkman, cooks meth in his parents' home, and the police find out about it. Later on in the series, his family goes to sell the property. They have a mystery buyer who negotiates the price and confronts them with the fact that there's documented evidence of meth being cooked on the property, and they end up having to sell it for a much lower value. Then later on, it's revealed that the mystery buyer was their son Jesse. they use this example for a plot device and to further the drama of the TV series, but in real life the same thing can happen. You could have an innocent property owner that loses the value of their property through no fault of their own from someone cooking meth there. So over the last few years, I've seen that the restrictions of cold medicine have drastically reduced the frequency in at least my town of these homemade meth cooks, bathtub meth occurring. We went from, in the early 2000s, about one a week to one or maybe two a year now. So while it's an inconvenience to go through the hassle at the pharmacy of answering 20 questions and having to show your ID to buy the over-the-counter medicine, the reduction in the number of meth labs and these ill effects that occur are well worth it.